There's a really common experience I hear from people who are struggling with their confidence at work. I know I'm capable, but I do still second guess myself. Logically, I know that I can do this, but I don't always trust myself in the moment. Or part of me knows that I do know this, but I still look for external reassurance. And what's important about this problem is it isn't a mindset problem. Like, it's not a lack of insight. And it isn't something that you can fix by thinking harder or by trying to persuade yourself with logic. Welcome to the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning. And in this episode, we're going to explore why intellectual knowing and believing, like embodied believing it deep down in your bones, are not necessarily the same thing. Why logic doesn't automatically update your confidence, and why experience, not explanation, is actually what shifts self-trust. First, I want to talk about that intellectual knowing versus real knowing. Because there's a kind of knowing that lives in language and it lives in logic. And this is your explicit memory system. Facts, insights, conclusions. So I might hear you say, I am capable, I can handle this, I know what I'm doing, or I did have an insight that I wanted to share in that moment and I was pretty sure that it was right. That's real. It's conscious, it's verbal, it's accessible to you. It is intellectual knowing, I like to call it, that you are capable. But there is another system which is also working alongside that, which we call your implicit or emotional memory, which is built from emotional learning and lived experience, not from logic. And this system, it doesn't think in logical sentences, it thinks in prediction. So, what has happened in the past when I've been in this situation or a situation like it? And is this safe or risky for me based on that past experience? And that is where the gap between what you know logically to be the case and what you might feel in the moment shows up. Because these two systems can hold completely different truths at the same time. So I want to explain why you can know something logically and still not feel it in the moment. Your brain does not store confidence as a single unified belief or a single unified feeling. It stores patterns of experience and it turns them into predictions. So even if you're thinking in a meeting, for instance, this is fine, I can handle this, I've done my prep and I know what I'm doing, your emotional memory system may still be running different data, like I'm going to get criticized, I have been exposed in the past, or I've watched other people be exposed. It may be storing situations where things really didn't go as planned, or you get asked a question that you could not answer, or there was a moment where you got something wrong and that uncertainty felt completely overwhelming. That system is much faster and it is automatic. And crucially, until you start working with it, it is non-verbal. So in that meeting, in that moment, you don't have access to this implicit stored emotional memory system, which is creating the feeling like the panic or the moment of doubt. You can know logically that doesn't automatically override what your system has learned through experience. So that's why you might say, look, I know it logically, but I don't feel it. Feeling is not a cognitive process. A lot of the time, for the issues that we're talking about when it comes to confidence at work, it is a learned prediction state. So I want to give you 3 kind of everyday workplace examples where logical knowing and what you feel in the moment can totally split off. The first one is around feedback. So you can know logically that it is a good thing to receive feedback, that everybody should expect feedback, and that sometimes your feedback is going to be good and sometimes it's going to be constructive. You can know that logically. But in the moment you receive it, if it's constructive, you might feel tense, you might feel tight, you might brace, you might have the response of just totally backing down or not being able to have the conversation. You might not be able to hear it clearly. You might over explain. You might replay it again and again in your head afterwards as if something's really wrong when you've received a piece of feedback. So, the knowing, the logical knowledge is that feedback is useful, but the felt response for you is that feedback is a threat. Here's another example. Somebody can tell me, I know I belong in that room because I'm there, because I've been invited, or because I've received that promotion. And that's a requirement of my role is to be in this room, in this setting with these people. But in that room, in that setting, you may hesitate or stay quiet or not be able to think clearly. So the knowledge, the logical knowing is that I've earned my place at this table. I have earned my place in this room. But the felt response, the emotional response might be, I shouldn't be here. I can't take up space unless I'm certain I don't deserve to be here. And here's another example. I know that I can make decisions based on my expertise and experience with imperfect information. But that fact and knowing that is not the same as how it might feel to you. So you might feel like I have to overthink this. I have to get more information, even if there isn't any. I have to know everything. I might seek a load of reassurance before committing, even though you know this is what I think we should do about this thing. I know what decision I want to make. It might feel like I have to seek a load of assurance. I'm not sure. I need to doubt it. So the knowledge, the logic might be I have the capacity and the expertise to make the decision based on my experience. But the felt response might be this uncertainty around this decision is very unsafe and needs to be avoided. Just 3 everyday examples. And I want to talk more about why more thinking and more logic doesn't close the gap between what you know logically and how you feel in the moment. So, a common response, and I'm sure I used to do this too, is try and kind of think your way out of this problem. So, you try and tell yourself, you try and convince yourself, I do know it is okay. I do belong in this room, right? Some people try affirmations like, I belong here, I know what I'm doing, etc. And trying to kind of logic and think your way out of this bind that you might find yourself in with more understanding or affirmations or reassurance or more analysis, even more thinking, doesn't actually help. Because the emotional learning doesn't update through or primarily through logic. It updates through experience. So let's take one of those examples. I'm happy to receive feedback. Logically, that's what you know. But in the moment, it feels like the feedback is actually a threat. But your system in that moment isn't asking, what do I know logically? And I will base how I feel about this situation on that logic. Not happening. It's asking, what's happened before when I've been here? What lesson did I learn? And therefore, what protective strategies do I put in place in order to respond in that moment? Which is why it registers as a threat and you respond accordingly. So if you're hearing yourself or seeing yourself in any of this, I want to share a bit about what actually changes it and how we work with it. So I find myself saying to clients when they come and have a consult with me about how I might be able to help them feel more confident at work, I find myself saying, so your belief is that you know what you're doing and you deserve to be in your job, etc., but you don't feel like that always in the moment. And we want to align in working together, we want to align what you know logically with how you feel in the moment. And therefore, you would be able to receive that feedback. You would be able to sit in that room knowing that you belong there and be able to contribute in the way you want. And you'd be able to make that decision in the moment, trusting and knowing that what you know is enough and getting on with it. So we want to align the feeling in the moment and the logical belief that you're already holding. And in order to do that, it's important to understand what actually shifts these patterns in practice. And as I said before, it is not more logic and more thinking first. It is a felt experience which triggers the shift, which starts to align the knowing and the feeling, the believing. So often what I'll do in my work with a client, let's say it's on a particular issue, like I know I belong in this room, but I start panicking as soon as I get in there and I'm overwhelmed by all the people and I don't share. So in our work together, I'm going to likely guide your mind and your body through a situation that can trigger that fear or that anxiety. So like going into that particular room, but in a way that feels safe and feels grounded and feels supported. So, probably if you've been thinking about this on your own and trying to kind of feel more confident in those situations by thinking differently, by logic, or just by pushing through it. But fear is not that kind of logic. It's an emotional and a physical response. So, often in a session, we're going to just gently bring to mind, call up in our minds the situation that's actually creating that problem. So in this case, the particular room where you're thinking, I know I deserve to be here, but I really don't feel like I do in the moment. We imagine entering that room with a completely different feeling state. We imagine what it would be like if we actually were walking into that room knowing that we belonged there. How would we feel? And you might say, well, I would feel quite relaxed. I would feel focused. I might feel prepared and I would feel, fairly neutral. And then once you feel that way, we walk into that room in your mind and we notice what changes. So instead of reinforcing that old fear response around the situation, your system starts to experience that situation in a whole new way and it will start to see totally different things. So the great thing about our brains is that they don't really register that much difference in an emotional felt response between a situation which is real and one which is fake, which is why your heart rate will still increase and you might start getting sweaty palms when you think about going into that meeting, even when you're not actually going in there. But we can use that to our advantage. So we can bring it to our mind and we can work with it in a session in our mind while we're feeling neutral, while we're feeling calm, while we're feeling prepared, while we're feeling ready. We can walk into that room and we can see what changes. We can notice the people and we might notice that they're just normal people and that actually they're peers and colleagues. And what do you know? We might notice that they felt like they were above us before, but now it feels like we're somehow on a level playing field. So as we notice that, we notice what it feels like to be on a level playing field and what changes when I am on a level playing field. And in that way, we go through that meeting and we feel what it feels like when you actually know I belong in that room. So we intentionally create and strengthen the emotional state that you actually do want, whether that's like calm, steadiness, confidence, and trust. And so your system actually begins to associate those states with the situation itself instead of the fear and the anxiety. And if the anxiety rises at any point during that visualized meeting, we don't avoid it. We work right with it in that moment and we help your whole body and your whole system to fully settle back into where you want it and need it before we continue. And when we do that, your mind, your brain updates what it thinks and feels about that situation. We're helping your brain actually relearn your response to that situation. The science is based around how emotional memory works. So when a stressful memory is activated, while the system is in a regulated state, the brain has an opportunity to update that file with a new emotion. And that is why these emotional responses can be updated rather than simply managed. So for quite a few people, this shift can be quite quick because once your system stops predicting the threat in the same way, the intensity of the fear reduces. So think about that feedback example. So we know logically that feedback is a good thing and that I should use it to improve my practice or something that I'm doing at work. But the emotional side of it is that I'm registering that feedback as a threat. Well, the aim is when we've done this work that your system stops predicting that a piece of feedback equals a threat. Sometimes the shift is immediate and clients will use words like bizarre and strange. And sometimes it really is built in layers, one little situation, one moment at a time. But the direction is the same. We want your system to learn a new response through experience. And some of that experience will happen in the session, visualized in your mind and in your body. And some of it will then happen as you go out and actually have that experience and it feels and sounds different than it did before. So rather than trying to manage the fear intellectually, we're actually helping your system to learn something different at the level where that fear is actually stored. So when you say, or when someone says, I know logically that I'm capable, but I've got all these instances at work where I just still don't feel it, it is not actually a contradiction. It's simply two systems running different learning histories in different areas of your brain, and never the two shall meet yet. Confidence does not come from logic or from convincing yourself or from repeating affirmations that are designed to hit yourself over the head a million times so you finally believe the thing that you know is true. It comes from updating what your system, that emotional implicit memory, has learned. It comes from experience, not logic. And I don't mean the kind of experience of you having done that meeting 5 times. I mean experiencing something in a different way, experiencing what it's like to know that you belong in the room, experiencing what it's like to receive feedback and be able to use it without registering it as a threat, experiencing what it's like to make that decision you know you can and need to make without it feeling like that much of a big deal. When those two systems are aligned, the one built from logic and the one built from experience, then what you know logically, you can feel. And that is how you become more confident at work. If you want to come and do this work with me, head to the link in the show notes and click to book a call to talk to me about private coaching. In that call, we're going to sit down together. I'm going to listen to the areas of challenge that you have, the particular things that you're struggling with, and I'm going to tell you whether or not I think I can help you. Another way you can work with me right now is through the Confident at Work program. That is a 12-month program where professional women are working on the internal skills that you need to feel more confident at work. Head to the link in the show notes, book a time, come and speak to me, and let's see what we could do to help you feel more confident at work. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident. Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident at work.